And I'll just tell you, this is the single most important thing to accomplish anything in life. The single most important thing to accomplish anything in life. So it doesn't matter what your journey starts you out on. If you don't know some of these steps, obviously the more of these steps you know, the more likelihood that you're going to achieve way more in life than you ever thought you would, just like what happened with me. So the very first place we want to start is how to achieve goals that will dramatically change your life, your family, your community, and your profession. And you have been exposed to this to some degree, goals, and some of this you'll be more familiar with. Some of it you won't be at all. Some of it will be in way greater detail than what you've ever heard. But this is exactly what it takes, and the chances are the more of this you do, the higher the likelihood that you're going to have, you're actually going to attain. And when we actually go through the steps, when you actually do this, you have a very high likelihood of attaining them. If you don't, the less of this you do, then it doesn't matter what we cover, you have a very low likelihood of attaining it. And you'll see why as we cover each step. Some of these, again, you'll be able to relate to specifically and personally. Some of them you'll be vaguely familiar with, and some of them will be totally new to you. So let's go into it. So this is how to achieve goals that will dramatically change your life, your family, your community, and your profession. This is exactly what I did. These were the steps. So I'm going to share with you a lot of personal information. These are the steps that I used, and I continue to use today. And what it allowed me to do is here's some of the major things it allowed me to do. It allowed me to open 77 offices in 20 states, being the largest chiropractic provider in the world. No other chiropractor in the history of the profession has opened more offices, responsible for over 600,000 patient visits annually. Gross collections exceeded $100 million annually. No other chiropractor has ever done this. Over 300 employees. Now, most of you guys have heard of James Parker. Jim Parker only had about 13 offices. Give you an idea of how dramatically different 77 offices versus 13 and how well you know Jim Parker from Parker College of Chiropractic. We had over 300 employees. I retired essentially at the age of 33. Retired meaning I could do what I want. I had more passive income than my fixed expenses, and I didn't have to work again. I was able to do what I want, travel the world, whatever I wanted, I did. Practiced full-time for only 7 years. I only practiced full-time for 7 years. Now, if I wanted to practice more, fine. If you want to, fine. But I didn't have to. I had 2 associate doctors in my practice. I was a speaker in 3 chiropractic colleges. I had a 97% good to above average speaker rating in those colleges. I personally donated over $500,000 to chiropractic, mainly in the schools, scholarships, and buildings. I've now authored 10 books. Never thought I'd author a book. And now I've written 10. Scuba certified. I've been scuba diving now for 32 years, and I'm private pilot license qualified for about 20 years. So, in other words, it's allowed me to do what I'm getting ready to share with you. Has allowed me to significantly enhance and change my life. It's allowed me to change my family, help my family. It's affected my community and my profession. And these are the steps that I'm going to go into that I've learned and have assimilated and accumulated over the years. So let's go ahead and get started with the steps that I've learned. And I'll just tell you up front, there's about 11 steps, and some of them are way more important than others. Matter of fact, I'll just tell you, there's some of them, if you don't do, chances are you're going to have a real low likelihood of attaining anything you want in life. So let's go into the first one, and the first one I go into, it says passion-based. So let me go into some of these key categories here, so it says worst to best motivation, relative to which phase of need you're in. So depending on where you are in the phase of your life, these are generally speaking, what creates motivation, okay, where the passion is. Now, so money is the worst motivator. People think money's, the ultimate motivator for everything, and it's not. Money's a great motivator when when your survival or your security is being challenged. You don't need any motivation. It's self-motivating because it'll actually take you out of survival and security. So that's when money is a good motivator. Low motivation, money is a low motivator, and it becomes a major problem once doctors make enough money to feel comfortable. This gets to be one of the biggest stumbling blocks of doctors growing a practice is after they start making, and I found it's basically over kind of a six-figure income, they get out of survival, out of security, so they're not, stressed, but they're not making enough to live the life they want or to invest like they want. And that becomes a real big problem, and I see that as a very common problem with doctors. Typically seeing like 80 to 120 visits a week. That becomes a huge problem. They make enough money that it totally decreases natural motivation. Now, that's why this is also important to understand these, because these are the exact steps I use with those doctors to take them from a state of not being motivated to motivation. And this is exactly the steps that I'm going through that I apply to them on a personal level. And you have to remember, everybody thinks they're motivated. I've never met one person yet, that says, "Oh, I'm not motivated." Okay. The lowest motivated person thinks he's highly motivated. It's really amazing. So personal gain is the second one. You'll do things for personal gain. The bad news about personal gain, it's very short-lived. After you achieve some personal gain, it goes by. The motivation decreases. So once personal gain is achieved, motivation stops. So personal gain is a low form of motivation, and it goes away quickly. But, it can help you get to another level. One of the best motivations that we always try to tap into that is sustaining is conviction. If you've had a personal experience, it's purpose-driven, it's a very strong motivator, and conviction can last forever. That's why one of the categories when I look at associate doctors, to be honest with you, is I look at their conviction level and what degree of conviction level. Because conviction is what helps you to overcome a lot of obstacles. And no matter what you do in life, you're just going to get a lot of obstacles. So the more passion and conviction you have, the higher the likelihood that you're going to overcome a lot of obstacles. Now, a conviction occurs in two ways, either from a personal emotional experience, or you can increase conviction over time. You can study it over time. So we like to start, with the doctors that already have conviction, and then we also include conviction over time. And that's a whole formula that I use separately. The last motivation is duty. That's a higher calling than self-preservation. Most of what we do is self-preservation. This is when we're talking mainly here about what you'll do for your God, your children, or your country. That's why I say, a mother will pay for her kids' care and stop care for herself, 9.9 out of 10 times to take care of her child before she pays for herself. So a sense of duty becomes a very unbelievably strong force. Now, most people don't have it, though. So if you can tap into a sense of duty, and again, most of the common senses of duty that people have are for their God, for their children, and that's a good by the way, these are good reasons. I've got doctors that that don't want to work because they want to spend time with their children. They want to influence their children. They want to share experiences with their children as they're being raised and things like that. See, those are very good, high-calling motivators. And then there's the country. And sometimes there's the profession. In this profession, it seems to attract a lot more duty people than, you don't hear dentists talking about their philosophy. You don't hear optometrists talking about their philosophy and the founder of optometry. Chiropractic has a unique set of people, those high philosophy people. And the reason this is one of the reasons it's always being sold in the chiropractic seminars, because remember, there's only 8% utilization. So it's very difficult to be a chiropractor because the market forces just won't make you successful. You actually have to know and do things. And what helps overcome a lot of obstacles in chiropractic is the philosophy. Now, I'm not saying that a good philosophy or it's a good reason. I'm just saying that's, when chiropractors get this philosophy, especially this subluxation philosophy and all that stuff, that the reason for that and the reason it's sold is it helps to overcome a lot of obstacles. That's why. Having said that, let's go to, so also I put here, passion changes with experience. What I wanted, and I always say this, whatever you want in your life will change. It almost change, almost every decade or with every experience. What I want for my life at this point in my life is very different than 30 years ago. And what I'm willing to do 30 years ago now is very different. So we always recognize that, where we're at in this particular space and time. But it's interesting, the younger you are, you think that those will always be, your driving forces in what you want. And it's not so, which is totally fine. But just being, when we make goals, we're realistic and we go, okay, well, maybe my values have changed. What I want has changed. And that's no longer important to me anymore. See? So we're paying a lot of attention to how experience and age changes our passion and what we care about. I'll tell you a big one. I get a lot of clients that are in their late 40s and 50s. And, they've either had some negative experiences, they got divorced, or they lost a lot of money or something like that, and they don't have a bank account to retire on. And now their freedom becomes way more important now than having to go to work Monday through Friday. And now they don't know where to turn. And that's where my consulting really comes in big, helps them out a lot. So these are some of the major factors we want to pay attention to. I'll give you a couple examples. By the way, as I go through several of these, I'm going to share with you my personal examples as well as consulting examples. So as an example with passion, a low-volume practicing doctors will do more unless they have internal motivation. So I'll talk about internal motivation a little later. When I'm dealing with doctors who are lower practicing, they're more in survival and security, and they'll do a lot more naturally than somebody who's already making good money. So it says doctors making good money will typically be willing to do the least. And I found that to be true. Again, that's if you take out what's called internal motivation, and I'll cover that in a second. So some of the hardest doctors to consult and get them to do anything are doctors, that are making a six-figure income. Typically seeing, like I said, 80 to 120 visits a week, something like that. They're the hardest because they're out of survival and security. And so the natural motivation is gone. So we have to put in these steps to get them moving again. Because if you don't, you'll just stay. That's it. You'll stay at 120. And some of you guys can relate to this. You can look at yourselves and go, yeah, I can relate to that. I'm having a hard time getting off my butt because I'm seeing, 120 visits a week, making $150,000 a year, which is enough for a good living, nice house, nice neighborhood, nice car, but that's it. No savings account, and then you got to get to work on Monday. So single doctor making a six-figure income with no motivation becomes a huge problem. So you got a single doctor has low expenses, essentially. And then they start making a six-figure income, seeing 100 visits a week or something like that. Man, you talk about typically one hard doctor to consult help. So I typically have to really go into these categories of motivation. So a doctor just getting started in practice, trying to get out of survival is high motive and will almost do anything. Those are easy ones. There's self-motivation with those. The more disposable income you make, the more it takes for you to get out of natural motivation of survival kills motivation. So the good news about not doing well is that it's self-motivating. The bad news about doing well is it kills motivation, again, if you don't have what's called internal motivation. We'll cover that in just a second. Doctors with high internal motivation keep pushing regardless of money. And this is what people get confused with. They go, they're just greedy. Well, let me tell you, it didn't matter. When I was making $500,000, $1 million a year, it was no different than when I was making, $20,000 or $30,000 a year. I still had huge drive making $1 million a year. It had nothing to do with money, and people don't understand that. So doctors with high internal motivation will keep pushing, and you see that, and I'll explain that here in just a second of why that's so. Doctors with no internal motivation and good income. So here's the deal: if you don't have internal motivation, and I'll define it for you. and you're making good income, that's the worst situation you could be in from a motivational standpoint. And the way to get out of that and to produce more and be more is to follow these proven steps, because you have to get out of that sense of security and act. And so many doctors aren't willing to act just because they're comfortable. I get that all the time. I get doctors coming in here that want to do personal injury or whatever it is, do this or that. And you know, they learn it, and they're not willing to do anything because they're in such a comfort zone. And they're not using any of these strategies. So that's number one. Number two is you do have to be specific. You got to define what it is you want. So the more general, the less effective. And I see this a lot. People make real general statements. I want to make more money. That's worthless. That's absolutely worthless. So you got to be specific. And these are the major factors that will kind of determine your likelihood. And so the more of these kind of rules and guidelines you use, the higher the likelihood of you actually attaining what you want in life. And some of these are way more important than others. Well, being specific is kind of important. So when we say specific, you know, we just try to get as detailed as possible, you know, the common factors of how, when, where, why, who. And I'll give you a couple examples. I'll give you a personal example here. Initially, when I started practice, I only wanted to see 100 patient visits a week. I thought, yeah, I'd be comfortable seeing 100 visits a week, make a good living, make a six-figure income, okay? Well, that didn't last very long. As soon as I made 100 visits a week, I got bored pretty fast. And then I go, okay, well, then I want to see 100 patient visits a week and $250,000 income. Well, that didn't take very long either. As soon as I decided to do it, it only took 6 months. Took no time at all. Then I wanted to see 250 patient visits a week. Then I wanted a second office and a $500,000 income. Okay? I'm sharing with you right now the psychology. In other words, none of these doors I had visioned or opened. They opened one after another. They were sequential. So the first associate doctor, so then I wanted the second office and the $500,000 income. Well, that happened pretty fast as soon as I decided on it. So within 2 years, I had my second office. Then the first associate doctor, and I wanted a separate practice apart. Well, the third office, and then $1 million a year. So I decided to go after $1 million a year. Well, that wasn't my initial. You know, initially, I just wanted to make a six-figure income, see 100 visits a week. So you have to start where you're at and allow yourself the opportunity to let windows and doors open and to be able to see things. And that's what a lot of times also other people are good at. That's when you do attain your particular goal, that's why it's good to go to step it up. Either step it up or move your time and energy to another venue. And then the third office and $1 million a year. Well, after that, then I wanted to train 2 doctors at a time. Initially, I was training 1 doctor practicing full-time. Then I trained 3 doctors at a time. So then I was training 3 doctors at a time and practicing full-time. Okay? Then I was training 3 doctors. So then the second associate doctor and not practice. So then I went, okay, wait a minute. I'm going to stop practicing. I'm going to bring on this second associate doctor. Train at least a minimum of 3 doctors every 6 months and not practice at all. And that's what happened within 6 to 9 years is when that happened. So each goal, now remember, these were goals. None of these accidentally happened. And I didn't jump from, you know, I didn't create large paradigm shifts and go, I didn't go from one office to say, I'm going to open 77 offices. That's not how it happened. And it doesn't happen like that. So with each goal, I include the plan and the timeline. So as I put these goals, as I started attaining these goals, in other words, I was specific, I had a passion for it, that I would put it on a timeline. So in 5 years, I had 35 office, 2 associate doctors, and I wasn't working at all. I wasn't practicing, and I didn't have to practice. I was essentially done. So in 9 years, I had 77 offices in 20 states, doing about $100 million a year, making a dual 7-figure income. And I didn't have to, you know, I already made money, you know, previous to that, because I had what's called internal motivation, and we'll cover that in just a second. So the reason I just wanted to share with you is this was part of my strategy and how I how I was very specific with what I wanted. I was very specific with what I wanted. And then as I attained it, it was rinse and repeat. I went to the next step and I got very specific again. And this is a very important part of goals. So the next one is writing it down, and this is a huge category. If you're not familiar with the Harvard study in 1971, what they found is they did a study of the Harvard graduates, this one particular class, and they found after 10 years they came back, 80% of those individuals in that class had no goal. Now they found that 10% that did have a goal but did not write it down made twice the income as the 80% who had no goal. But what was so important about this study is they found the 10% who had the goal and wrote it down made 10 times the income as the 80% who had no goal and did not write it down. Writing down keeps you accountable. It does a lot of things psychologically. Psychologically, writing it down does a lot. Keeps you accountable, keeps you focused. I'll just tell you right now, when I have somebody that has a goal and I ask them if it's written down and they say no, I'll already tell you right now it's not going to happen. So this is one of the major aspects of attaining your goal, is writing it down. If you don't write it down, you can be guaranteed it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's now no longer a goal. It's called a dream. And a lot of people have dreams. So here's an example, a couple examples. Is all my goals are written down on a legal pad. I just took a legal pad and I just wrote down my goals. And I typically divided them up into like short-term goals, 3 months, like real short stuff, 1 year. And then I had one called lifetime, things I want to do in my lifetime. Okay. So legal pad is, I kept where I kept the legal pad where I placed my keys and wallet. I always kept my keys and wallet in the same location. Now, the reason that's so important is you have to see them daily. You have to be reminded daily of why are you getting up? Why are you doing what you're doing? You've got to be reminded of it. So, and then what I would always do is I'd review them quarterly. Every quarter I'd just kind of review them. Where am I at on track with doing this? And definitely each year, at the end of each year, that was all that, every year it's always a good time to stop and reflect. That's what we're doing here. Let's go, okay, where were we at, and where are we going? So New Year's are great to assess your life and where do you want to take it. So the goals, and remember your passions and your values change. As an example, I have one client and he thought he was only going to increase his practice probably $100,000 when he started with me. And with the end of the first year, he increased it, or within 6 months, he increased his business $350,000. And it was within 18 months, he increased it $1 million. Did he ever think he was going to increase his business $1 million with me in 18 months? Never. But this is the process we used to go to that direction. And then each year, I crossed off what I attained. So whatever I attained, I crossed off. And then I kept on the list to focus more. In other words, if it was something, and if it was something on the list I took off, it was because I didn't value it anymore. It wasn't something I valued. Okay, so I either kept it on because I valued it and I still wanted it. I took it off because I stopped valuing it, or I took it off because I attained it. That's it. But otherwise, it stayed on there. And it may not have been a short-term goal, and even if I didn't attain it short term, maybe it moved into long-term category. One particular goal I remember is I always wanted to run a marathon. I think a lot of people have that idea when they're younger. And so I always had on my goal list to run a marathon. And I always worked out and did things and this and that, but I never aggressively put in the training schedule to run a marathon. And it just so happens about 5 years ago, I was in an opportunity where there was a marathon taking place, and I was actually staying for several weeks. And so I decided to go ahead and put in the month's training and go ahead and go after the marathon. And that's what I did. So now and that took me 20 years. but I crossed it off my list. I've now run a marathon, and by the way, I'll never do that again. But it's something, it's a huge challenge to overcome and have the ability to do something like that. Not many people can say they ran a marathon. So having said that, let's go. So that was a kind of a classic example. That was kind of a short. I started that out as maybe a 1 to 5 year goal, and it ended up being a 20-year goal, and I finally got around to it. So anyway, having said that, let's go to the next category here. Timelines are, boy, I tell you what, timelines are. Too much time decreases motivation. Too short a time is not realistic. This timeline thing gets to be pretty important. A realistic timeline. So you want a realistic timeline with micro steps. Now, I'll give you an example of what creates non-realistic timelines. So let me give you a couple examples here. So doctors say they want to do X, and they give themselves a year without a timeline or micro steps. Or let's say if there's no timeline at all. So if you say, I want to do this and there's no timeline, you can be guaranteed it's not going to get done. You just take whatever it is you're thinking and move it into the dream category. It's no longer a goal category if there's not a timeline. It's not written down and there's not a timeline. It's called a dream. It's not a goal. So I see this all the time. Doctors say, I want to do X, and then they give themselves way too long. Either there's no timeline or the timeline is unbelievably too long. A common example I get is doctors said, I want an associate doctor within 1 year. Like, that's way too long. Number one, they won't do anything. There won't be any motivation for like 9 to 10 to 11 months. And then the 11th month is, that's when the motivation will start. And now it's too short and it'll never happen. So most of the time I see most doctors think it takes much longer to build a practice than it actually does. Now, for them, it's real because they are in a state of unconscious competence with no mentor or accountability. In other words, if you don't have somebody to show you a window, show you a path, it does seem like it's going to take longer. And that's what I found that happens. It seems like it'll take longer than what it does when it really doesn't, and it shouldn't. And when you put it out there too far, you won't even take the next steps. You won't do anything for months and months and months. And then when the time finally comes around, you'll just have never gotten it done. So this timeline thing gets to be pretty important relative to goals. And I've said that with doctors before. They'll say, I want to increase my practice 50 visits a week, and I'm going to give myself 6 months to do it. And I'm like, you're crazy. That's way too long, number one. We should get this done like in 90 days. So let's go to the next major category, which is called micro steps. And this is another major component. This is what stops paradigm shifts. This is what allows you to do things you never would have thought you could have done in your life. I never would have thought I could have done everything I've done in my life if I only looked at the end goal. So micro steps is the absolute one of the major keys to take anything. And you've heard the old saying, what's it take to eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. Well, that's how I see everything now. And it doesn't matter what the project is. I don't care how big and overwhelming it looks, because it's not. I just look at it and go, okay, we're just going to break this down. And the bigger the project, the more micro steps I just break it into. So what happens is when you don't do micro steps, when you try for too much, it guarantees failure. Break that, go into multiple micro steps. Okay? You don't say, I want 10 offices. I'm like, well, maybe I ought to learn to do 2 first, That's like, I get that a lot. Doctors go, I want to do this many offices, and they don't even know how to do their own. I'm like, well, that's never going to happen. So micro steps in the timeline are very important. I'll give you a couple examples again here. So here's a real common one with chiropractors, is to increase your patient visits. So you just take the number that you want to increase it, and it doesn't, whatever number that is, relative to your ability, before you start leveraging time with associate doctors. Take the timeline that you want to increase it. Divide into the patient retention to find the number of new patients necessary. So however many patients I want to increase my office, let's say 50 visits. Let's say I want to do it in 90 days. Well, what's my patient retention? Well, let's say it's 20. And then I'm going to just divide that into how many new patients am I going to need at 20 visits a week to increase my practice 50 visits a week. That's how I'm going to look at it. And then now I have the total new patients that I'm going to need at that patient retention to see 150 visits a week. And then I create a marketing plan within that timeline to create that many new patients. So let's say it's an extra, I don't know, say 5 new patients a month or 1 a week. Let's say 1 a week. Well, I'll just put in a marketing plan. I'll go, okay, what am I going to do above and beyond what I'm doing that'll create an additional 1 new patient a week? And then that's the skill level, that's the knowledge, and that's what I'll impose. And so if you just increase your business 1 new patient a week and your patient retention is whatever it was, there you are. And 60, 90 days later, you just increase your business, and now you have the knowledge and skill to do it. And that's how I just rinse and repeat. You just rinse and repeat. That's just how it just keeps growing like that. That's a real common example, by the way, I just gave you. Very easy way to build a practice. Number 6 is visuals. And visuals another one of those things that I kind of say, if you don't have a visual, chances are it's not going to happen. So you have to create a visual. So you remember how we communicate is 7% is verbal, 36% is tone, 55% is visual. So if you see it, you will believe it. This is why TV beat radio, is because of the power of visual. Now, you also want to see it daily. These are some real regular motivators. So you want to post it daily. I'm going to give you a couple examples. And that's, by the way, that's why I put my goals and my legal pad right where I always set my keys in my wallet. I always set my keys in the wallet in the same location so I don't lose them. I know where they're at. And that's exactly right where I put my goals. So I saw them every day, whether I wanted to or not. Okay? I'll give you a couple examples of how I did here. So I remember when I saw the movie Risky Business and I saw that Porsche, man, that was, to me, that was the car. I saw that movie, I guess, in the early 80s. I thought, man, when I make enough money, I want one of those. That was a Porsche 928. It's like a spaceship. And I printed out got a picture of it. I put it up on the wall. That was the car I wanted when I started making money. And within 2 years of practice, I had a red 928 S4 Porsche. And the timeline I had it, I thought I would have it, when I was an older man. I remember it was the same with my boat. I went down to the river my first year. I was associate doctor. And I went down where all the boats hang out at the restaurants, and I saw this one real nice cabin cruiser boat, had kitchen inside, and I'm like, man, eventually in my life, I'd like to have one of those. Well, within 2 years, I had that exact boat in the marina parked right there. And I thought, wow, this never would have happened without knowing how to set goals and using all these strategies. It never would have happened. And one of the things I did with associate doctors when I was training them, and if you have associate doctors, you definitely want to do this. And by the way, I do this with staff members, associate doctors, and I do it with staff members. I use all these strategies with staff members. Maybe that's why, my staff members didn't leave me. I had a lot of reasons, but in other words, one of the main reasons is I always was helping them help themselves by using these strategies. All these strategies I'm sharing with you, I covered with my staff members to help them to increase the quality of their life. And I did it with my associate doctors. So my associate doctors had to make what I call poster boards. They were for the visualizations. And usually when you're younger and you're getting in practice, your house is pretty important, your car is important, maybe a hobby or two. Those are the things that are more important in your 20s. So we had them all. Now they had to put all these on poster board. They had to put the exact kind of house, the color of the house, the style of the house, the exact kind of car, the color of the car, all these visualizations. And then they had to, we did more to it, but they had to commit to it publicly. And then we put that poster board in, it had to be in their office where they saw it every day. Remember, if you don't see something every day, it's worthless. So we put it in their office where patients could not see it. Patients could not see it. It's not something you want patients to see. And I can't tell you how many associate doctors not only attained those goals and how quickly they attained them, but thanked me later for doing that, for helping give them absolute direction and focus to get what they wanted real fast in life. And I tell you, who really thanked me was their wives, because that's typically what they were going for, is the home, the car, starting creating security for their family. That's typically what they were going for in their 20s, early 30s. So that category is unbelievably important. Again, I would say if you don't have it written down, if you don't have it on a timeline, if you don't have a visual, you have a dream. You don't have a goal. Next one, and by the way, as you start doing all of these activities, it's amazing the influence and power that it starts taking over your life. Everything about you starts moving in these directions, and I'll explain why in just a second. Now, I'm going to go over this next concept that is unbelievably important. I've found to be just amazing. I still use it to this day, and it's a very personal part, and I'll share it with you. And that is to say your goal out loud daily. And it's hard not to follow your goal when you say it daily. It's hard not to follow it. Remind you of it, put you in that focus, put you in that state of mind. Man, it is hard not to attain a goal when you say it daily. Everything about you moves in that direction. Now, let me just share with you. There's a book called Psycho-Cybernetics, and I'm not going to get into all the details. But basically, it's basically of the self-fulfilling prophecy. And that in your anatomy, you have what's called the reticular activating system, and your consciousness stimulates the subconscious. So your consciousness, now it's either directly or indirectly, and it'll stimulate your direction and your actions. And this is why the people you hang around and what they say are so important to your success. That's why when you get around people that always put you down, and you allow it, it's constantly taking you down and lowering everything about you subconsciously. But at the same time, the reverse happens. Well, what you want to do is not only control the people around you, you want to say things good about yourself. And I'll share with you a couple unbelievably powerful examples that I used, and I still use today, that affect my subconscious, not just my conscious, my subconscious, that puts me in a direction and of life that I want to go. So I'll give you a couple examples right now of how I use this. Well, number one is, I remember when I decided to become a chiropractor, I kind of always thought I did, and I didn't want to say it publicly because I didn't know if I could do it or not. But I finally decided, I did enough research, and I said, yeah, I think I can do it. And then I committed to my family. So now I remember specifically sitting down at the dinner table saying, this is what I've decided to do. And I did that purposefully to help motivate me because, I didn't want to let my parents down. And that was a very definitive, highly specific point with absolute direction. It's when I committed to my people that I cared the most about, my mom and dad, that I said, this is what I was going to do. And that's where you can use social fear and fear of failure to motivate. So social fear and fear of failure you can use for very positive terms. Now, the next thing I did, I attribute to a large portion to being successful in many areas of my life, not just successful, but overwhelmingly successful, and really the ability to overcome major obstacles, a lot of minor obstacles and major obstacles. There's not a whole lot that have stopped me. So here's what I did is on a 3x5 card at my desk, and I still have that written today. And I have two things that say, remember the topic we're talking about right now. The topic is verbal, the importance of verbal in your goals, saying it out loud. And so what I did is, there was a phrase that I really liked. I never saw myself as extremely talented and knowledgeable, but I knew I had ability. So the phrase is persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. Omnipotent means you can do anything. persistence and determination. So it had nothing to do with, how smart you are. I knew I wasn't that smart, but man, I knew if I could have persistence and determination, I knew I could do anything. And that's very true. So I'll always look for persistence and determination over smarts. There's a lot of smart people. One of my roommates in college was one of the smartest guys I know, and he never did much with his life at all. For many of these reasons that I'm going over right now that he didn't do, that affected him in other ways. But he didn't do much with his life at all. He's way, way smarter than me or anybody else I know. He's probably got a genius IQ. So persistence and determination are alone. So I had that little card right in front of me. Remember the importance of visualization. So it was in front of me. I saw it every day. I put it in front of me so I'd see it every day. I put it right in front of my desk. And so I saw it. And then I would say it every day when I sat down to study. The very first thing I did is I read that card several times out loud. Out loud. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. And it's unbelievable the strength you have when you tell yourself you're strong. It creates a tremendous amount of perseverance. And then the next one I'll share with you, and this is a real personal, I don't share it a lot, but for this particular subject, it's important, is I had a phrase that I said, I can, I shall, I will. And so every day when I got out of the shower, I looked in the mirror, I looked at myself. That was the person I was trying to influence. And by the way, these are the things I do today. Sometimes there are different topics depending on what I want. There's another topic that I say every day right now. It's unbelievable how that's just come to pass. But when you remember what you say to yourself is what you become. So I would get out of the shower, look at myself, and the visualization I knew was unbelievably important. The personalization was unbelievably important. The vocalization, because I was using sensory and motor, and the repetition. So there are a lot of things going on here. And I would just say to myself, I can, I shall, I will. And I'd just repeat that until I was like screaming, 4, 5, 6 times. I can, I shall, I will. I can, I shall, I will. And I tell you what, it makes you strong. It makes you just bowl through, over, and around. And that's what you have to do. That's what I had to do to open 77 offices in 20 states, be a multimillionaire in my early 30s, and have freedom, be able to do what I want. So these are some very powerful strategies. Matter of fact, what I'm covering right now, I'd recommend that you just taught your children and walk through with your children. Unbelievably powerful strategies, especially when you combine them. The next one is the rewards. And a lot of people forget, they'll look at the ultimate end reward, which is fine, but they'll forget the micro rewards. And they'll even put them, they'll even minimize them. Like, that's a huge mistake. You always want to reward your micro steps. Reward them with minor rewards, always, because it creates a feeling of accomplishment, number one. But small rewards maintain momentum. This is just a human experience. It doesn't matter if it's you, an associate doctor, or your staff. All of these I used on my staff. They got micro rewards that led to their big rewards, okay, with micro steps. So, using these things for yourself, and some of the examples is, that I would do, there's big reward that I was going after, but I may go, when I hit these steps, these micro steps along the way, I would go, okay, I'm going to buy tickets to, favorite events. Like I particularly like tickets to Broadway, or tickets to Actors Theater, or tickets to like real nice expensive restaurants, things like that. So I'm going to make, so all these other little kind of things that I wanted to do, I turned them into the rewards, the micro step rewards. And that included short vacations, like 3-day break, take off Friday, Saturday, Sunday, fly out of town Thursday night, come back Sunday night. Just nice little quick rewards on the way to the big reward. But they are, and I can't tell you how many people overlook this. They'll go, oh, it's no big deal. It's just on the way. I'm like, no, it's a big, big deal to reward yourself, because it creates momentum, a sense of accomplishment. It helps to propel you even further along. And or hobby rewards, like if you get Another reward I gave myself, I remember, is I got season basketball tickets to the local college. I'm like, oh man, I'd like season. I said, I'm gonna give myself that reward if I accomplish this micro step along the way. And there you go. We had those also. So unbelievably important to reward yourself. And then motivation, and this is like crucial to understand this. Everything revolves around this right here. Major concept of motivation. Again, this is with your staff, your associate doctors, yourself. Remember, everything that I'm sharing with you right now, I personally do, have done, do, active, proactive, everything. So major concept of motivation is the stronger motivation. There's way stronger motivation to move away from pain than toward pleasure. So there's some real key concepts to understand with motivation. Number one, when I say pain, I'm not just talking about physical pain. Physical pain alone can get you to do a lot of things. I know people that had, there's not just personal people, but I remember one of the big female track stars. I can't think of her name. She had in her youth, she had an accident, and they told her she probably would never walk again. I can't think of her name off. If I said her name, you'd know it. I can't think of it. Well, she became the biggest track star of the 60s because of her physical pain, the pain of overcoming that, see? And so there's emotional pain too, and then there's psychological pain. But this overwhelmingly, and I read a lot of biographies. That's one of the things I like. One of the things I always try to focus on is biographies. I have a large library, a lot of biographies on successful people. And you'll find over and over when you get into their life story, that it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about all the pleasure stuff. Those were accidental byproducts. It doesn't matter if it was Dale Carnegie or Ted Turner. I mean, you'll go into the read their biographies, you'll see the same story over and over, that they were running from internal pain. That was the major motivation driving force. And the pain could be physical, could be emotional or psychological. So pleasure and pain. And also remember, pleasure and pain is based on self-perception. So one person could look at, and go, oh, this was this was a very painful experience, and I want to do what I can to get the heck away from it. Like one family member, and the same person could totally see it differently. So it totally depends on your self-perception, and it depends kind of where you are socioeconomically too. But this is the core. Every time you find somebody who's done something really strong, they're almost always running from high internal pain. And I'll go into the details of that a little bit more here. And whether you do or don't have it, or how to harness it. So there's 5 types of what I call natural motivation. So curiosity is only 5% motivation. Future pleasure is very low. Future pain is low. Present pleasure is low. Overwhelmingly, why we do what we do is what's called present pain. Now remember, when we say pain, we say physical, emotional, or psychological. So, and present pain. Now, what pain are we talking about? Where? Well, you're not familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow did a great job. He's considered essentially the father of psychology, and he did a huge study on human motivation, and it's overwhelmingly seen as the authority on human motivation. And essentially, there's the survival component that it's huge pain. We're trying to survive. There's a lot of people will do a lot of things to get out of survival. To get their food, shelter, oxygen, their physiological needs met. That's the very first, most important thing, and it's an unbelievably strong motivator. The second one is security. Security is not just physical security, it's emotional security, financial security. Okay, so those are unbelievably strong motivators, and they're pain-based motivators. In other words, you're trying to trying to get away from them. Those are what I call natural motivators. When somebody is in this perception of their life, they don't need any motivation at all. They don't need a pep talk. They don't need to go to motivational seminars. None of that. That's all natural motivation. By the way, that's why it's so easy when I work with doctors. It was very difficult when I had a doctor like I said, seeing 100, 120 visits a week to get him to see an extra, 30 visits. It was unbelievably difficult. He's making a six-figure income. He's out of survival, out of security. The natural motivation's gone. But then I could turn my attention to a new guy who's just starting out, and now he's trying to make a life for himself. And that was easy, unbelievably easy to train the new guy to see an extra, 80, 100 visits a week. And of course, when that guy typically went up to 100, 120, then he was toast. Then I'd go to the next new guy because took a lot less energy to get somebody who was in survival security to 100, 120 visits, to increase their visits 100, 120 visits a week, to get out of survival security, than somebody who was already out of survival security and increase their business 10 visits a week. It was unbelievable, night and day difference in the effort it took and the willingness. Everything was night and day difference. So that's a lot of times why I say you take your associate doctor, get them to 80, 120 visits. That's going to be easy to do for the most part between systems and their natural motivation. And then boom, and now it's up on them. But chances are their motivation, that's it. They peak out because now they're living a decent life. They're out of survival and security. Now the way to get out of that is to use these steps. You want to, if you're in that phase, these are the steps to use to get out of it. So the next is socialization, then materialization, and self-actualization. So socialization and materialization are pleasure-based. So they're very weak, and self-actualization is unstoppable. That's, again, when you're talking about what you'll do for your God, your children, your country. In other words, it's no longer about you. Okay, so having said that, so motivation depends on which stage you perceive. Motivation depends on which stage you perceive yourself. So again, you can have two family members come from the same family, say poverty and all kinds of negative things you want to get away from. And one person, it does an unbelievable job of imprinting that person for them to have huge drive. And the other person may not, because they saw it differently. They didn't see it as a painful experience. So again, it also depends on, are you seeing it as a painful experience? And there's people that see painful experiences that are doing real well. So there's three types of natural pain-based motivation, and this is unbelievably important. So circumstantial pain is very temporary, lasts for a day or two. So, these are things I pay attention to with doctors and associate doctors. Examples, a flat tire. You get a flat tire, that goes to the top of your list that day. Everything else goes to the bottom of your list. But it's circumstantial. It's short-lived. Next one is I call external pain. That's unexpected. Let's say an unexpected housing repair. The cost to cover it in your budget. Well, it could last for several days or months. But when the stimulus is over, it's over. It's over when the stimulus is over. So that might be another example of what's called external pain. And an example with chiropractors is, I'll interview chiropractors out of school. Remember, they're in survival security. They'll say anything to get a job and get going. But I look way deeper into that because their history is going to tell me a lot more than, okay, well, what's going to happen after that is satisfied, after they have their car and their house, what's going to happen? Because I already know that's going to be what's called external pain, and that's going to be quenched pretty fast. So I want to look at other factors. And then there's what's called the internal pain, and this is the huge pain. This is when you're imprinted as a child, pain-based imprint. Remember, it's the pain, physical, psychological, emotional, that we're trying to run away from, especially when that pain is in the survival security category. It's the highest motivation, or absolutely is. Some of the common pain-based motivators are divorce of a single parent, parents are on drugs, raised in poverty. So I traced my motivation. Obviously, I'm a high motivated person to do what I did, and it's because I have huge internal pain. And it took a lot to understand this, and that's why when you see a lot of people who've done well, like I said, Ted Turner, Dale Carnegie, and all this, they have a lot of high imprinted pain as a child. That is a major indicator. Now, I personally found that only 20% of the population has it. 80% of the population does not have internal pain. In other words, when you get out of survival and security, that's when motivation goes away, essentially. And it becomes very difficult unless you follow these patterns, these steps I'm talking about. But the 20% that has the internal pain that's been imprinted as a child, they'll keep pushing. And that's what happened with me. I make $100,000. I kept pushing. $250,000. I kept pushing. I was out of survival and security, making $500,000 a year. I kept pushing. See, it's not about the money. That's what people don't understand, that there's still this perception of pain, and that's what keeps driving. And remember, I'm not just talking about physical pain. So, and I'll just share with you a personal story with this. I remember I was raised in what I would call middle lower class family. I remember I only had one new pair of jeans as a child. Everything was secondhand, Goodwill store, things like that. I remember we had ends of the bacon for bacon. We didn't have regular slices for the deli meat. We didn't have regular deli meat. We had end cuts, the cheap end cuts, things like that. Well, my father was military retired, and my mother was she was an uneducated housemaid. She just worked on help cleaning up some of the officers' quarters next to the military. But here's the point that I'm making is I was imprinted very different as a child than my brothers and sisters. First of all, I had a strong emotional attachment with my mother. But I remember money was always a problem. Every time there was an argument in our house, it was always about money. So it created a lot of negative imprinting, a lot of pain. I didn't want that to be a part of my life because I saw how much it hurt, my family and my mom. And then I remember I'd lay in bed at night, as you're like getting ready to go to bed, and I'd just be in there talking with my mom, other family members are out watching TV or whatever. And she didn't know this, but she would tell me, the problems, this little kid. And she was just venting, that's all. She just needed to vent. But little did she know that, how she was hurting this little kid, imprinting and hurting this little kid that, I didn't want that to happen to my love. And that's why I said, not only subconsciously, but I've learned that that's where my drive came from, my internal pain. And that's why I always said I'll never let money be a financial problem. I'll never let money be a problem in any of my relationships. Because I saw how bad I was. In other words, I will do anything and everything to overcome that, to do what I need to do so money's not an issue. And that's why and how I was able to do what I was able to do. And that's why, I'm on my second office, third office, fourth office, and I look around, and the guys that I started practice with, they start making $150,000 a year, and that's it. No associate doctors, no other office, no other investments. That's it. They just started living their life. That's it. I'm like, why do I keep pushing? And they're not doing anything anymore. Well, that's why. They didn't have the internal pain. And once they were out of survival and security, their natural motivation was gone. Mine wasn't. So these are all factors that become very real. And that's why if you have no internal pain, you can overcome where you're at, but you have to use these steps, or it just won't happen. So internal motivation is constant regardless of the stage of life you're in. Doesn't matter if I was making $1 million a year and had a house and two houses and a boat and a yacht and a car and a plane. It didn't matter. You always see yourself as in a painful situation. So anyway, having said that, that becomes unbelievably important. Next one is commitment. Make public to those you love the most. Public commitment to the ones you love magnifies the pain of failure. Again, we're constantly paying attention to the pleasure-pain model and micro steps and all these things, but we're being highly aware that it's overwhelmingly the pain that's going to motivate you to get you to do something. So, you want to make public to the ones you love the most. That's why I made the announcement to my mom and dad I was going to be a chiropractor. I didn't want to let them down. I knew I'd be held accountable. Now, again, if you make those announcements public to people you don't care about, it doesn't matter. You'll break those promises. That's why I remember I was helping one guy with his goals, and I had him make the promises to his little kids. He didn't want to break their hearts and hurt them. And that's what helped hold him accountable, is looking at his little kids every day, saying, this is what I'm going to do for you. Public commitment to the loved ones magnifies the pain of failure. So you see, I'm using all of this strategy. I'm using it as an example. I'll give you 2 examples I'll share with you. There's one, I wanted to do triathlons, since I was doing my first triathlon. And now remember, I taught swimming, but it was the first triathlon, and typically the swimming of your first triathlon is always the toughest for many reasons. And I had a very, very difficult time halfway through the swim. Matter of fact, I almost thought I was going to drown. And I remember specifically the reason I did not stop. I could have stopped. I could have just, grabbed one of the local boats and could have pulled me to side, and that would have been it. But I did not. And I remember specifically the image I had in my mind, because I already told all my family members on Facebook and my friends I was doing a triathlon. And there was no way I was going to show back up and let them down. And I distinctly remember my mind. That was the absolute motivating force that got me to swim the rest of the way and get out of there. And I'll give you another example. One of the associate doctors, he got into that situation where he was seeing 120 visits a week, making over 6-figure income. Natural motivation goes away. He's out of survival, out of security, but then again, he's not doing well enough to live a high standard of life, have a huge disposable income, make large investments for security and wealth. Okay, so it's a real dilemma. So, we used all of these formulas, but simply what I did is we found out somebody he cared a lot about. He really respected his in-laws, his wife's mother and father. He really liked them and respected them. He didn't want to hurt them. And we found out that they like cruises. And so what we did is we tied the goal of increasing his practice. Now, I'm just cutting to the chase on this. We followed all of these steps. All of these steps I'm covering, I did with him. But the cut to the chase is we went to the high emotional component. And we committed to them that he was going to, and we did a timeline, that he was going to finance their cruise within 3 months. He was going to get his practice to a certain level. We were going to increase it, I think, 50 visits a week or something like that. We went through the plan, the marketing, everything. That wasn't the problem. We know how to build practices. The problem was motivation, getting him off his butt. So we tied the pain to something he cared about, which is his in-laws, and something they cared about. They loved cruises. So we basically made him commit that he was going to buy his in-laws a cruise when he got his practice up an extra 50 visits, and to expect it in the next 90 days. Wham! Man, you talk about, he did, in less than 2 months, in 6 weeks, he did not want to let his in-laws down. And that's how these are all and we made him acknowledge it to his in-laws. He gave it to him as a present, gave it to him in a card, publicly acknowledged it, picked out the cruise. In other words, we were making it, we were burning his boat. Well, this is what it takes when you don't have internal drive and you're in a state outside of survival security. These are the steps. And then we go to accountability partner, which can be a huge, huge asset. And I'll give you some examples of how I use accountability partners and how it helped me. So here's some good examples. Someone on a similar educational level is unbelievably important. Someone's on a similar path. Someone you care about, someone you will help in return. Someone that they'll help create pain, and pain of failure. In other words, you don't want to fail because of this, with this person. And we use social pressure. Social pressure can be a huge motivator for the good, not just the bad. So I'll give you some common mistakes and some examples of accountability partner. And that alone, using these formulas with accountability partner is huge. So some of the common mistakes is a wife who does not care or know about your business. I've seen wives be detrimental and even negative when the chiropractor says, oh, I'm going to do this. And then they're saying negative. Oh, yeah, right, honey. You'll never do that. Whoa, you got some serious problems in that relationship. And if they don't know anything about it, and that's why when the wife not only knows the basics of the business, but it is actually positive to help you achieve that. It's an unbelievable strong force, but it's so rare. Most chiropractors' wives, that category doesn't happen. And then someone who cannot relate to your level of awareness. So let's say, I'll give you a simple example. Let's say you have a college degree and now you're talking to somebody who doesn't have a college degree. Those are two very different experiences. So you got to be highly aware of your level of awareness. And then someone significantly lower in their life than where you are in yours. In other words, where are they at in their life relative to where are you? So maybe you would just help them, but they would bring nothing to the table. They would bring nothing to help you. Other chiropractors that are not on a journey of success, I see that with a lot of chiropractors. They're not on a successive journey. They start making X amount of money, and that's it. They're in total passivity. And, if you want to get ahead in life, you got to stay away from those people. And I'll share with you some examples that I use. One is when I first got into practice, there was Dr. Craig, he was great for sounding board for just the basics of practice management. So he was my accountability partner in the very beginning, just learning the basics. And then when I started a practice, there was another friend, Dr. Steve, I'll call him. We started at the same time, so we were going through, pretty much the same thing. He started a month before me. So we started at the same time, and so we were looking to do the same journey. We were looking to grow together. Well, we'd have dinner 3 times a week, and he'd be our standing board. We'd talk on the phone every day, like at breaks and at lunch. We'd call, hey, what's going on? What's going on? In other words, it was a sounding board and somebody also to share your growing pains and how to overcome issues. So accountability partners they're very powerful when you have an accountability partner. And we went to seminars together. I mean, we did everything. But I had to leave him because, he got to that complacency. He had a successful practice and he was out of survival and security, and that was it. So I still had that huge internal drive. So I had to bypass him, I had to leave him by the wayside, and I had to reach up to the next one. And then there was Dr. Dan. He practiced right up the street from me, and we were on a similar journey of being successful. He was really good with wealth strategies. Dr. Dan retired at age 39, so he was a very focused guy. So we'd have lunch 3 times a week, and it was. Remember, chiropractors have 2-hour lunches, so he was just 2 miles up the street from me, so we'd have lunch, and it was always we'd talk about wealth strategies. So he was a great sounding board. These are called accountability partners. I didn't hang around losers. I didn't hang around people that said he couldn't do it. I didn't hang around people that weren't ready to go to the next level. And then I grew too big for chiropractors mentality. I had to move into the business world. You start talking about more than one office, you just lose 80% of the chiropractors right there. So I quickly moved out of who I could relate to and talk to. And now I segment the accountability partner depending on the business category. As an example, right now, I have categories: internet marketing. I grow my internet marketing business, so I have mentors only in that category. Real estate investing. I've been doing that forever, but that's such a big opportunity. And so I'm in mentor groups right there twice a month. And I've decided to learn how to sell. So I've got a 34-foot sailboat, and I hired a mentor to teach me how to sell. So the accountability partners are very specific and unique to each strategy that I want. Okay? So same with you in your practice, Good news about being in a practice, if you just want to grow your practice, well, we know how to grow a practice. We know new patients. We know patient retention. We know overhead. We know management. We know how to bring on associate doctors and train them. We know how to open multiple offices. Been there, done that. Okay? You're not going to have anything new that I haven't experienced or done. So the good news is you can get that level very easily with me. Some of the other areas of your life, you don't need to use me or anybody else. You need to find somebody that is, at higher than your level in that particular category. And this is why mentors are so unbelievably important to achieving your goals. So you got to remember the 4 stages of learning, from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to conscious competence to unconscious competence. So The 5 methods of learning. So there's books, seminars, tapes, experience, and mentoring. And remember, I'm using these all the time. I'm highly aware of everything I'm sharing with you right now. And that's why it's so easy for me to go from point A to point B so fast. So the stages of learning, to go from unconscious incompetence phase. So what are we going to do there? That's when you don't know what you don't know. Book, seminars, and tapes. That's what will take you there. Okay, so that's what we'll start with. Now to go from the conscious incompetence phase, know what you don't know. There's huge negative feedback. That's what stops most people. Usually the natural pain motivation is gone, like I said. Change requires challenging the security, which is the second highest need in life. That gets to be a big problem now. Challenging security and self-talk stops most people. Do not have the skill level to create significant amounts of positive results. Stopping the activity. So experience is the worst teacher. So usually your self-talk will stop you from doing something. And if you try it without going through mentorship, there's so much negative feedback because you don't have the skill level. That alone stops you from doing it. Now here comes the end of the world now. So not taking personal responsibility and blaming the external environment now allows for stagnation and failure. That's typically when I call people losers. Not because they fail. You're never a loser because you fail. You're a loser when you stop trying and you blame everybody else. You're guaranteed not to do anything. So what's so powerful about the mentors, and that's why, as I learned all this, this is the method that I always choose in every and anything I do. I don't spend a lot of time wasting on things that aren't very effective. So 7 steps to a good mentor. Remember, the mentor takes you from conscious competence to owning a skill and creating positive results, whatever that category is, patient retention, marketing, whatever category you want in your life. So we talked about the passion, make sure there's passion involved. We create the end result, which is the pleasure. Remember, that's weak depending on what it is, but pleasure is typically weak. Remember, if pleasure was strong, everybody would be doing everything. So we create the pain-based motivation. That's the strong part. So we identify some very personal pain-based motivators. Then we break it into micro steps and we put it on a timeline. And this is how a mentor can take you from point A to point B pretty quickly. No negative feedback during learning. That's unbelievably important while you're learning, or when you get shot down, you'll quit. Sensory and motor to get muscle memory. That's why it's so important to practice, to get muscle memory. And then from conscious competence to unconscious competence, that's the black belt level. That's high success rate with activity. That's what you can perform that particular activity without, that just takes repetition with oversight. So it's very easy to get from that point. And these are the strategies. It's an unbelievable amount of strategies. And I've just found some of them are just way more important than others. But the more that you do and the more you acknowledge them, the more you're aware of them, this is how you can set and achieve goals that will dramatically change your life, your family, your community, and your profession. I gave that presentation. I was on a cruise, business cruise, and I was paired with he had a master's degree in business from Harvard. That's who I was paired with on this cruise. We were roommates. It was a business cruise. And we just shared stories, and I shared with him this story, what I just shared with you. Now remember, he was a Harvard graduate. He had an MBA from Harvard, master's in business from Harvard. He was blown away. He had never heard anything like it. He was so excited. He goes like, you have to write a book about everything you just told me. This is everything, bits and pieces are known here and there. He goes, but I've never seen anybody put it together like you just put it together. This is unbelievable. And so it is unbelievable. It's a friend of mine had, the friend I was telling you about a little earlier, his name's Dan. Well, it turns out later in life he had cancer. He had a very unusual malignant cancer. It had not metastasized. And we were talking, and he was going to go undergo surgery to have the cancer removed and chemotherapy. And so now your life in the balance. Now you think about your life in the balance. And he said to me, I remember this is somebody that we'd traveled the world together. We did wealth strategies together. He retired at age 39. Okay. And I remember distinctly, he said, Paul, if I don't make it, he goes, I've had one heck of a life. I've done, more than anybody else, and way more than I ever had expected, as a child or young adult. And I agreed with him. I said, man, and this was in our early 40s. I said, you're right, man. If we go now, it's been an unbelievable life. Everything from here out is just cream. It's just, and what I've been able to attain in the journey, being raised in a town of 3,000, from a lower class family with no college education, no business experience, to be able to apply these rules to do what I've been able to do is just absolutely amazing. And that's the power of understanding some of the basic principles of goals and human nature. It's all about overcoming human nature. That's where we need to start. That's where everything starts. I know that went long, but that was worth it. You'll never hear that again. And I would suggest you do a couple things. Number one, I'll send this out. I'd suggest you get very familiar with everything I just said and start applying it. Number two, if you have kids, I'd sit down with your kids. I'd have them watch this. And I'd walk through with your kids each of these categories to help them succeed in their life. If you have associate doctors, you have them watch this and you have them go through all the categories I just covered to help them succeed in their life. And staff members, you go through this, you want to create killer staff members, help them in their life first before you expect your help. Do this with your staff members. Walk through this with your staff members and help them attain higher quality of lifestyle for themselves.